Imagine waking up at 6:30 a.m. to the piercing sound of an alarm that feels less like a wake-up call and more like a battle cry. You drag yourself through a practiced routine, caffeine, commuting, and the inevitable fluorescent hum of an office, only to spend 8 hours trading your most cognitive energy for a steady paycheck, all while a nagging voice in your head asks, "Is this really it for the next 40 years?" For decades, society has branded anyone who pushes back against this structure as lazy, entitled, or unrealistic. But that narrative is finally crumbling under the weight of modern psychological and economic reality. The truth is, the widespread disdain for the traditional 9 to 5 isn't a rejection of hard work. It is a biological and psychological revolt against a rigid, industrial-era relic that was never designed for the human brain, the digital age, or the complexities of modern fulfillment. We are currently witnessing a massive cultural shift where people are realizing that their laziness is actually a high-functioning survival mechanism, reacting to a system that prioritizes presence over productivity and compliance over creativity. By the end of this video, you'll understand why your laziness might actually be your greatest competitive advantage in the new economy. To understand why the 9 to 5 feels like a cage, we have to look at its origins. This structure wasn't handed down on stone tablets. It was a compromise born in the 1920s during the height of the Industrial Revolution. Labor unions fought for the 8 hours for work, 8 hours for rest, and 8 hours for what we will model to prevent factory owners from working employees to death. While this was a massive victory for human rights at the time, we are still using that exact same template in 2026. Despite the fact that our economy has shifted from manual labor to knowledge work. In a factory, your output is directly tied to the hours you spend at a machine. But for a graphic designer, a software engineer, or a marketing strategist, the 9 to 5 model is fundamentally broken because creativity doesn't operate on a linear schedule. You cannot clock in a breakthrough idea at 10:15 a.m. and clock out of a problem at 5 p.m. Research shows that the human brain is only capable of about 3 to 4 hours of true high-intensity cognitive focus per day. Everything after that isn't work, it's theater. We are forcing ourselves to sit in chairs for an extra 4 hours every day just to satisfy a 100-year-old management style designed for people making Model Ts. The concept of time greed in corporate culture suggests that if you aren't visible, you aren't valuable. This leads to the phenomenon of presenteeism, where employees stay late just to show the boss they are dedicated, even if they finished their actual tasks hours ago. This creates a cycle of exhaustion that yields zero economic value. Think about the mental drain of the middle management layer, the endless meetings that could have been emails, the bureaucratic red tape, and the constant interruptions. When your brain is constantly forced to switch tasks, you lose what psychologists call cognitive switching penalty. It takes an average of 23 minutes to get back into a state of flow after a single interruption. In a traditional 9 to 5 office, you are interrupted dozens of times a day. By the time you reach your peak focus, it's time for a lunch break or a mandatory huddle. This isn't just annoying, it's a systematic destruction of human potential. People don't hate working, they hate the inefficiency of a system that actively prevents them from doing their best work. Beyond the historical mismatch, there is the undeniable factor of biological autonomy. Every human has a unique circadian rhythm, an internal clock that dictates when they are most alert and when they need to recharge. The 9 to 5 assumes a one-size-fits-all biology that favors larks, morning people, while systematically punishing owls, night people. For an owl, being forced to perform high-level analytical tasks at 9 a.m. isn't just difficult, it's biologically counterproductive. When people say they hate the 9 to 5, they are often saying they hate the chronotypical oppression that leaves them perpetually sleep-deprived and mentally fogged. About 30 to 40% of the population are night owls, meaning their peak brain activity doesn't even start until the sun begins to set. When an owl is forced into a morning-centric world, they perform in a state of permanent social jet lag, a condition that mimics the symptoms of clinical depression. Furthermore, the advent of the digital world has made the physical office and the grueling commute associated with it feel like an unnecessary tax on our most precious resource, time. When you spend 2 hours a day in traffic just to sit in a cubicle and join Zoom calls you could have taken from your kitchen, your brain naturally rebels against the inefficiency. The psychological toll of external control is perhaps the most significant reason for this systemic hatred. Humans have a fundamental need for autonomy, the ability to choose how, when, and where they apply their talents. The 9-to-5 structure is built on a foundation of surveillance and micromanagement. It assumes that if you aren't being watched, you won't work. This lack of trust erodes the intrinsic motivation that makes work meaningful. When you lose the power to manage your own day, work stops being a craft and starts being a sentence. Many people who quit the 9-to-5 find themselves working harder and longer hours as freelancers or entrepreneurs. This debunks the laziness myth entirely. They aren't running away from work. They are running toward a version of work where they have agency. The hatred isn't for the labor, it's for the loss of dignity that comes with being managed by a clock rather than by results. This shift towards self-directed labor is the hallmark of the 21st century professional. We also have to consider the sensory assault of the modern office. Open-plan offices were marketed as collaborative, but studies have shown they actually reduce face-to-face interaction while skyrocketing stress levels. The constant noise, the lack of privacy, and the feeling of being watched create a low-level fight-or-flight response that stays active all day. When you return home, you aren't just physically tired, you are sensory overloaded. This leads to revenge bedtime procrastination, where you stay up late into the night just to reclaim some sense of personal freedom. The resentment people feel is a defense mechanism against a culture that views humans as hardware rather than highly sensitive biological systems. The financial reality of 2026 has also fundamentally changed the equation. In previous generations, the 9-to-5 offered a social contract. You give the company your loyalty and 40 hours a week, and in exchange, you get a house and a stable middle-class life. Today, that contract is largely void. With the cost of living skyrocketing and wage growth stagnating, the reward for the 9-to-5 grind no longer covers the cost of the sacrifice. Why sacrifice your mental health and your family time for a job that could lay you off via an automated email? When the incentive structure is broken, the motivation naturally follows. If you can't buy a home or retire comfortably on a 9-to-5 salary, the psychological justification for enduring the misery disappears. The movement against the 9-to-5 is a movement for human optimization. It is about recognizing that we are not robots. We have seasons, moods, and creative peaks that a rigid schedule cannot accommodate. The laziness narrative is a tool used to keep people compliant, but it is losing its power. The future belongs to the non-linears, the people who work in bursts, respect their biology, and refuse to confuse busyness with business. If you feel this resistance inside you, don't suppress it. It is your intuition telling you that you were designed for more than just being a data point in a legacy system. You aren't lazy. You're just an early adopter of a world that hasn't quite caught up to you yet.